Well, I'm lying here in the bed with the side of me head on a pillow and my left eye closed, and I'm not supposed to open it, or if I do open it, I'm not supposed to move it for about 10 days. And I'm supposed to be lying here. I can't move my head except for 10 minutes every hour. Well, I never knew all this about a detached retina before, but sometimes when you get sick, you learn the hard way and you learn very quickly. What happened to me was I've had a little problem with the eye, the left eye, for about 4 or 5 years, and there was an ophthalmologist who was watching it very closely, and you get flashes in the eye on the side, little spots flashing, and then you get sometimes a kind of a gauze curtain. If you ever have any of those symptoms, you need to go to your ophthalmologist fairly quickly. Well, I was going to the ophthalmologist, and last summer she noticed there was a kind of a raised area somewhere in the back of the eye, and so she sent me to the specialist the following day, and the specialist looked at it and he said, that's a detached retina with a high water mark. Now, he said, you've nothing to worry about there. He says, you're very lucky because it is detached, but it's a high water mark, meaning that it's still connected. I don't know what it means. But basically, he said, there's only 1 in every 170 people would have a further problem with that. So you're lucky it went the way it did. Everything is fine, carry on. Well, I carried on for 6 months, and then just after Christmas, I noticed the flashing in the eye was returning, and I noticed that the dark gauze was coming down over part of my vision. It was a funny thing happened to me after Christmas. On the first day after Christmas, it was St. Stephen's Day. I started thinking about the problem with the eye, and I got an interest in holy wells that would have a cure for the eye. Now, at this stage, there was nothing wrong with my eye except just a slight bit of flashing. But I decided then in the new year, on the 1st of January, I headed off to a 4. It's a place in Westmeath, a lovely place. It was a 6th century monastic site, and then it was renovated in the 12th century, and the ruins are still there, and you can walk all around it, and there's supposed to be magical miracles there, like water that runs uphill, and there's cures in the water, and so on and so forth. And my mother, who came from Anchorland, not directly, but her mother was Elizabeth Lynch, married a Finlay man in Cavan. Well, Elizabeth Lynch originally came from Anchorland, which is beside 4. And so I've always felt an affinity with the area. And off I went there, and I walked around it for a good length. And then it got me interested in the whole idea of holy wells and the cures. Because the holy well seems to me to be a beautiful outdoor church. Especially in times of COVID, to visit a holy well and to say a few prayers at a holy well seems like a wonderfully environmentally friendly way to pray. And off I went the following day to a St. Patrick's Well, which is near Skryne in County Sligo. And it's hard to find, but it's there, very, very beautiful well, an old ancient statue of St. Patrick from about the 1930s or 1950s, and a kind of an attractively derelict feel to the whole business, and the water coming up a lovely well. And there I was. They're supposed to have the cure of the sight in that well. Now, I wasn't looking for the cure at this stage. Here's the interesting point. I wasn't looking for the cure. I had nothing to cure. My eyes were fine. Little flashing in the left eye, but remember the doctor had told me last summer there's no need to worry about anything like that. Okay, so I go to this well and I enjoy myself at it and say a few prayers and I go home. It's a beautiful day. In fact, I went down to Innisgrone afterwards and walked the whole length of the beach, and the amount of people on the beach in Innisgrone, I couldn't believe it. It was chock-a-block. It reminded me of Juhu Beach in India when I was in Mumbai, many, many years ago. And I used to go out to Juhu Beach and it'd be black with people. Well, Innisgrow now on the 1st of January there, it was fairly chock-a-block with people, all doing their walk along in the turquoise sea and the turquoise sky. Very, very beautiful day. I went home and I said to myself, I enjoyed that so much that I think I'll find another holy well in the morning. And you see, you go to random holy wells, but the idea of saying, well, a well that has a cure for the eyes would be an interesting well to go to. So I found that there was one way down the Shannon. It was called St. Diarmaid's Well. And the following day, then I drove down there, and St. Diarmaid's Well is beside a kind of a bit of the lake. It's a bit of Loch Ree, I would think, and a place called Port Runny. And you can get out of the car park and walk back the road as far as this little laneway. It's called the Old Road, I think. It's an ancient road that they have redone. It's like a pathway. And there, just at the corner, you'll find the well. And I love looking at all the ancient things, we'll say relics of people who have been there. Do you know the way they leave holy water bottles and bits of old statues, and they're all sitting up on the stone wall, and it just has a strange feeling of old Ireland to it. And in some sense, it's a kind of an Ireland that, because of the past 20 years of modernisation, socially, culturally and religiously, we have become a more, they would say, enlightened people, more secular, more free from the tyrannies of religion and that. And so these images look very much of the past, you'd get them in movies. When there's a movie about Catholicism as an oppressive sort of system within the country, you'd usually get those kind of images, very kind of garish looking, statues of the Virgin Mary or whatever, sitting on a ditch. But I find them very primitive in an attractive way. I find them very ethereal, very essential. And I also find the well is amazing because, to me, the well is like, it's the blood of the land, it's the earth. And I think of the Virgin, the Mother of God, not so much as the Virgin, but as the fertility of everything, like that fertility is something to do with the earth, but it's also to do with a human life in your soul, and as a writer, you would talk about times in your life that you have fertile periods. So fertility is a kind of it's a metaphor that works for me, and these wells make me think of the earth as Mother Earth. And so that was the second beautiful well I went. It was St. Diarmaid's Well. And when I was at St. Diarmaid's Well, I Googled to see was there any further wells anywhere near me. And lo and behold, I found St. John's Well about 9 kilometres away. And St. John's Well was, it was a beautiful well. Really, really, like perfectly surrounded, out in a big field on its own, and then surrounded by a kind of a stone wall. And then inside the stone wall, 2 pools. And you could see it was a still day and there was no wind, and you could see the movement of the water. The surface of the water was moving all the time as the water came up from deep underneath. And my goodness, I remember that in the Shannon Pot. The Shannon Pot's like that as well. And we used to go to the Shannon Pot when I was in my early 20s and I was living in Glengavlin. I was living very, very close to the Shannon Pot. and we'd often go there. Myself and the girlfriend at the time, as a little romantic stroll, we'd walk down the hill to the Shannon Pot, and through the fields, by the way, from a place called Corratavi, if you know, the bars of Largy in Glengevlin. But anyway, leaving that aside, it was the same kind of bubbling, not bubbling, but if you've ever seen a really good well, you can notice the wonderful sense of the sort of water surfacing when it's a still day and breaking the stillness of the pool. And that goes on all the time, 24/7 for whatever amount of thousands of years that well is there. So that was a beautiful well, St. John's Well. It's not far from Portrunny. You'd find it on your Google, your sat-nav, if you just Google wells near here when you're at St. Diarmaid's Well. And enjoyed that hugely and superbly. I went home that day and I was very happy with myself. And the next day I said, where will I find another well? And it dawned on me that there's a well beside me that we used to go to many years ago for holly. It's called Hubert's Well. It's also called, in Irish, it'd be Bio-E, Tubber Bio-E. I thought that meant the lively well of E is Hubert, the lively well of Hubert. But in actual fact, I read up on it and it told me that Hubert was the lively one, the well of lively Hubert, because he was considered a lively old creature. And this is a well now it's over in Ballinaglara on the eastern side of Loch Allen. And I think it's the most magnificent well you could imagine. It is so remote. And you come to it down a long laneway of beautiful stone wall and a kind of a cobblestone pathway that must be there for hundreds of years. And the cobblestone pathway goes past the well and onwards towards Dubally, where the ancient monastic settlement might have been. And I walked that road, a little cobblestone with about 2 meters in width. Cobblestones under the rushes and under the grass. A pathway, a kind of a walkway that must be there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Anyway, you come to Hubert's Well, and as I say, we used to go there all the time for holly. Well, we'd go there and you'd get the best of holly at Hubert's Well, and in actual fact, when I looked up one of the townland names, I realised that in Irish, Cullen means holly, and Ard Cullen, the townland, would have been, the high place of holly. And those townlands are very ancient. They go back maybe thousands of years. So the holly has been growing around that well from the time of the Druids. This is an ancient well now. Hubert's Well, it must be a very high-ranking Druidic well before Hubert came and blessed it, and it became Hubert's Well. And it's a haunting place because it's completely overshadowed by these trees, huge big holly trees. I've never seen holly trees with trunks as big as these, and they just shelter the whole well. And the well itself has got a kind of a lid on it, an old, these are the stones that must be there, as I say, from the 6th century. But it's that kind of beehive shape that you'd often see in the little monastic sites in places like the top of Skellig Michael. It'll remind you of those, even though it's just a kind of a nice hood on the well. Oh, so beautiful. And I had a great time at it. And at this stage, to be honest with you, I was starting to shift into a kind of a prayerfulness. Like the first day when I went to Fore, it was more like I was a tourist walking around the place. And then the second day when I went to Diarmaid's Well, I still felt a bit of a tourist, and there's a car park beside Diarmaid's Well at Portrunny, and there was a couple of people in cars and they were sitting out at tables and they were having their picnic. And so I did feel like a bit of a tourist. And then when I went to St. John's Well, that was the well that it was on its own in a field with a big beautiful wall around it. And that was the first time when I saw the water coming up, the movement of the water on the surface, breaking the kind of glass sense of the stillness of water, and you see the well coming up. I kind of had a tinge of prayerfulness in that moment. And I actually blessed myself. It was the first well that I actually blessed myself with the water from it. And I was able to concentrate just for a second in a kind of prayerful way. And I thought about that sense of Mother Earth and the great Mother. You know, what is hidden in the womb of the earth. Not so much the beauty of the earth at the surface level, but what's hidden in the earth underneath. So beautiful. And that was a prayerful moment. Now, by the time I got to Hubert's Well, I was completely overtaken by the old prayerful energy. You know, prayerfulness is a kind of it's like an atmosphere, isn't it? It comes at you like an atmosphere, a mood. You know, the way if you go into a certain flashy big pub with a lot of kind of disco music in the background, it nearly kind of triggers you wanting to have a pint or a gin and tonic. And then there's other places like, you know, there's cathedrals, or for me probably maybe Orthodox churches where you go in and it's all darkness and there's a red sanctuary lamp and it's sitting in front of maybe an icon and it triggers your kind of prayerful energy. You get it in churches, in Catholic churches, Protestant churches, you get it anywhere. You get it in beautiful old buildings, you know. It triggers some kind of awareness in you of not just the surface of reality, but the depth of reality, the invisible depth of reality. And that sense of a triggering happened to me very big time at Hubert's Well. Well, I thought I was doing pretty good, but I didn't realise I had the best ahead of me, because the following day, now that I was realising that you didn't have to go far in Leitrim to find a holy well, I looked again at what was near me and I found there was a well for St. Alva, and it was up in the Arigna Mountains, and the approach was through the town of Giva. Well, I went over to Giva, and it must have been about 3 o'clock when I got there, and I drove up a zigzag road way up towards the windmills, and then I parked the car at the end of the road and followed the laneway and a few old derelict signs saying Alva's Holy Well, and onwards I went until I was so high up near the windmills that I was in the clouds, and it was about 4 o'clock and it was getting dark. And I walked for another mile, let's say, a good mile. And eventually, even in the clouds, and them going grey and dark and hard to see, I could see in the distance on a hill an old porcelain statue of the Virgin Mary, like calling out to me. And I says to myself, it must be over there. I crossed the drain and I went up through the rushes and I got to Alva's Well. It was another well where there was a lid on it, you know, of ancient stones in the shape of a beehive, and so attractive. And you'd want to be going through the story of Alva and the story of Diarmid and the story of Hubert. But I'll not do that for the moment. They're all, I suppose, saints from the Celtic Christian Church, 6th, 7th century. And they're extraordinary to me that those wells are there still, and they're still minded by local people, and they're still reverenced, and they're still busy places. The following day I was heading for Donegal, And I says to myself, I'll go to the final well. Now remember, I had been at Patrick's well, I had been at Dermot's well, I had been at John's well, I had been at Alva's well, I had been at Hubert's well, and I had been at 4, where the water is sacred. And that was 6. And I says to myself, I need to go to number 7. And if I visit 7 wells, it'll be good for me. And so, on my way through Donegal, I veered across after the town of Donegal and went as far as Killybegs. And in Killybegs, I visited the most extraordinary well of all. Because in Killybegs, there is the well of St. Catherine. St. Catherine of Alexandria. She was a saint in Alexandria. Now, the story about her is very young girl, and they wanted her to marry some pagan, and she wouldn't have anything because she felt she was wedded to Christ. And of course, they tortured her horrifically on what's called the Catherine wheel, and they cut off her head. Pretty tough stuff, you might say. But that's the kind of stuff that saints seem to go through. I'm taking a glass of water here. I'm taking a glass of water because I'm in the bed, and I'll get to why I'm in the bed in a few minutes. But anyway, there I was at St. You wouldn't believe what's in Killybegs. You have to go to Killybegs to see St. Catherine's Well. It is magnificent. It's like something you'd see in Portugal or something you'd see in the Mediterranean. It is so well kept, with kind of cement steps up to it and a beautiful banister and railings around it, and then a beautiful white wall around it. And it painted. So you get that whiteness, that whiteness on stone that you'll get in Mediterranean countries. And there's St. Catherine's Well. The story being, well, now, how did St. Catherine get to the west of Ireland? There's a number of stories about this. The best one is that there was 3 monks, and they were out fishing, and they got into a storm, and they prayed to St. Catherine to rescue them, and they promised that if they came safely back to land, they would dedicate or name a holy well in her honour. These would be monks of the early Christian period. Now, why would they be praying to a saint from Alexandria, is the question. Well, there's no answer in that except to say that there's a great link between the desert fathers, the monastic tradition in the early Christian period in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. There's a link between that monastic tradition and the west of Ireland. Because if you look from Skellig Michael right up along the west coast, as far as Killybegs, which of course is called Killybegs from the Irish na Callabega, and the Callabega would be the little hermitages. That word kill, we talk about it as meaning a church, but in fact it means like a small cell, or a little hermit's space, or a saint's space. Kilronan, Killenda, Killena, Killybegs, na Callabega. And if you come on your way into Killybegs on the right-hand side, you'll see that they've put up kind of imitation monastic cells, very similar to what's on the top of Skellig Michael, to remind people of what that word, that town means, na Callabega. So it was an early settlement of monks in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. And sure enough, you get a link with Egypt. You get a link with the deserts of Egypt, because that's where the whole spirituality of the Irish monks really originated. And they certainly took with them their saint, their great saint, Catherine. great St. Catherine, you know, it's the name of the great monastery, the Sinai Monastery, is St. Catherine's Monastery. And in Ventry and Kerry, there's another story that St. Catherine's, you know, that they couldn't bury. There's a story I heard in Ventry and Kerry, and anybody from Kerry can now correct me on this because I mightn't have it right, but the story I heard was that, you know, the St. Catherine, they tried to bury her in Egypt and they couldn't bury her. So that they put her in a coffin, and the coffin floated down the Nile and down the Mediterranean and up and landed outside Ventry on the strand, and they had to bury her in Ventry. That's what they say down there. Of course, that's what you call hagiography. I mean, you don't have to go into the forensic and literal truth of it. Of course, it's not accurate as a literal truth, but it does have a deeper meaning. It does have a deeper truth, and that is that the faith of St. Catherine in Alexandria is the same faith as the faith of the monks in Kerry or the monks in Donegal. Well, that was the final wonderful, magnificent well I was at. And here's the funny thing that happened. I don't know why I did those wells. There was no reason except after the 1st of January I was kind of bored and I didn't want to go back working to serious writing. I thought I'd love to wander around a bit, and I can't go to meet people, I can't socialise because of Omicron, COVID. So the Holy Wells gradually gave me something to do for the week, and I enjoyed it. All right. The second week of January, I'm lying in the bed and I'm looking sideways over at the clock. And as I look sideways, my eye is on the pillow, one eye, so it's closed. So I'm looking through the other eye. Now, you don't normally look through one eye sideways. But I noticed as I looked sideways through the one eye that 1/3 of my vision was entirely black. And I says to myself, dear, oh dear, that's not good. So I got up out of the bed and I phoned, because I was lucky enough to have the phone number of the consultant that I was with in the Galway Clinic last summer. I was lucky to have his phone number. I phoned it and the receptionist answered. I said, I'm a bit worried. I was with, Mr. Kinsella last summer, but I said, I'm a bit worried. I have a kind of a black area coming in my vision. Well, she said, Michael, you need to get over here as quick as you can. You need to get over here tomorrow. That's what we call an emergency. And I did. I wasn't happy now at this stage. I was starting to get very worried. I went over the following day, and Mr. Kinsella looked at the eye, and he said, you just happen to be the 1 in 170 that is unlucky enough for this to happen. You're having a problem. The retina is detaching. You have a tear there at the back of the eye, and we'll have to fix it as soon as possible. As soon as possible was about 4 days later. So he said, go home and put your cheek on the pillow and keep lying that way and don't move too much and come back to me next, I think it was Wednesday, and we'll sort you out. Well, I was devastated and I went home and I was shocked, and the following Wednesday I went back and I went in for what I knew now was going to be an operation. And they took me into the hospital at about 1:30, and the usual old procedures about your details and all the files and forms you have to fill up. And then they put you into the bed, and then they put the tag on you, and then they put the awful part about operations that I don't like is when they give you the stockings to put on and the kind of little bed robe that covers your front but doesn't cover the back of you. I hate that. You know, you really feel you're up for execution. And there you go, you lie in the bed like that until they wheel you down to the operating theatre and you see Mr. Kinsella smiling at you and saying, we'll sort this out, and somebody puts an old plastic thing over your nose and the next thing is you're unconscious. You wake up 3 hours later and they say, don't move. So for about 5 hours, from about 6 o'clock in the evening until about 11 o'clock that night, I'm lying flat on my back, can't move. Then they say, well, you can move up a little bit now, 45-degree angle, but don't move your eye and don't get out of the bed and all that. And you're there all night, very uncomfortable, but very, very grateful to have a serious operation over with. And you ask people, how did it go? And they say it went very well and your eyesight's going to be fine and all the rest of it. The following day, I meet the doctor again, Mr. Kinsella, and he looks at the eye and he says, that's all good. The pressure is good in both eyes. But he said, you go home now and there's a gas in your eye, right? There's a gas in your eye and that's kind of helping it heal. And you have to go home now and take up a position where your head is on one side of the pillow and you don't move it except for 10 minutes every hour, and you maintain that for the next 10 days. Now do you see where I am? Do you see who's talking to you now? So I'm lying here, very, very happy, very content. It's great to have the, YouTube and podcasts and audiobooks. So very content lying in the bed. What else would you be doing in January, sure? Except lying in bed and hibernating. And very grateful to Mr. Kinsella and all the nurses in the Galway Clinic. Very grateful to be alive and very grateful for the sight. And I can see through one eye perfectly. The other eye now is a bit, it's like, I'll tell you what it's like. It's as if I was looking through a holy well from the bottom up. It's all wobbly liquid. And it feels to me that I went to the holy well and was thinking about how you get a cure of the eyes at the holy well, that in some sense it anticipated the catastrophe. And for some reason, when the catastrophe happened, when I noticed there was a black area in my vision, and when they said to me, it's an emergency, and when they said, we need to operate on you as soon as possible, I wasn't panicking. Not because I felt, oh, it'll all get fixed and cured, but because I felt my heart's in the right place. I felt a kind of a prayerfulness that had first come upon me maybe at St. John's Well and came upon me in a stronger way at St. Hubert's Well. You know, it came upon me at St. Catherine's Well. Just a sense that when you go to a holy well, it's like an environmental open-air church. It's a beautiful way in COVID to connect with something sacred, the same as you do when you go to a church. And you go to the well and you say a prayer or you bless yourself with the water from the well. And in some way you're doing a physical ritual that connects you with Mother Earth, the sacredness of the earth, but also the sense of the invisible world. The mentor deities, who are the ones who mind you, the ones to whom you will ultimately go home. And making that connection at the holy well put me in the right mood for catastrophe. It's as if I was in a boat and the boat hit a storm. But I had already put St. Catherine in the boat. I already had a mentor deity. I had a rudder. I had something that was guiding me through it. And I didn't plan it that way. It's just that that's what I happened to be doing first week of the year. And then on the second and third week of the year, there I was in the catastrophe of nearly losing the eyesight because of a detached retina. And thinking, isn't it wonderful that I was at the Holy Wells? And not because of a magical cure, but because the real cure, I find, with illness is when you connect with the other world, not with the surface, but with the depth of reality. And when you connect with the depth of reality and you have a right relationship with it, a sense that your mentor deity is in your frequency, and you're in the frequency of your mentor deity, your God. And when you get that sense of belonging, almost, a sense that you ultimately belong with God, when you get that sense, it's like a frequency thing. That carries you through the illness, not with the guarantee that you'll be cured of it physically, but that no matter what happens, you are cured. Because the healing is the awakening of something inside. There is some way that illness actually awakens us to more intense and alert ways of being alive. We pay attention better. You know, they say in the Orthodox tradition that prayer is simply paying attention to God. And some way that illness works is that it brings us closer to that moment of attention. Or as Rumi says, the great Sufi poet, he says, the wound is where the light comes in. Well, when you have a detached retina, it is a wound, it's a tear on the eye. And there is light comes in because you see it flashing. You see it flashing at the side of your vision. But there's also a light that comes in at a deeper level, at a I do try and say metaphorical level. Metaphor is not really the right word, but language at the surface cannot contain what is in the depth of language. And in the deepest sense of meaning, illness is where the light comes in. So, folks, that is my remarkable story. And I'll be writing about it. I think the magic of having connected with the wells, as I say, and then found that they gave me a kind of security when the catastrophe came the following week, unexpected. I think I'll have to write that into my next book, which I'm in the middle of at the moment. But I'm not writing now, and I won't be writing for another 3 or 4 weeks. I will be doing the podcast as normal, and because I'll be having a checkup on Tuesday next in the Galway Clinic, I'm very much hoping to be back to normal on podcasting next week. So there you go. Very happy to share this adventure with you. And I hope you're keeping well. And I hope you're enduring whatever catastrophes in health or other ways that you're having to go through. I hope your mentor deity, whoever it may be, is with you and that you have that right relationship, that you know who to hold on to in the dark and in the storm. And thank you for being here. Thank you. And bye-bye.